a perfect little segue to our final speaker. Thanks again, Dr. Rubenstein. One of the missions of IFoRE really is to bring together students and young scientists with professionals and really create that connection and convergence. And our fourth speaker in this block is a student, Torben Heinbockel, and we have students that are presenting and hosting talks and sessions for the first time this year. So Torben, welcome, and he is going to present Hands-on Learning Experiences, HOLES, a student-led model for growing STEM interest and literacy. I will pass it off to you. Welcome.
Yes, thank you for the wonderful introduction, Mr. Papagan. Let me just share my screen here. All right, so let me present this here. All right. There we go. Can you see the full presentation without any of the speaker kind of stuff in it?
Yes, looks good.
Cool. All right. Let me just get this up here. All right, cool. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Torben Heinbockel. I'm a student at St. Paul's School for Boys, and I do research, as Mr. Papagan said, at Towson University. And I'm the founder of EinSTEAM, 501c3 nonprofit organization, which is what inspired me to give this talk to you guys here today. So a quick question to start off. When did you fall in love with science? With a worksheet or a problem you could touch and test? And that kind of rhetorical question, because today I will show how near-peer hands-on modules called HOLES move learners from passive to active. We will cover why early STEM education matters. We will go over 3 ready-to-run activities with my proven results and how you can scale this model in your own setting. As I go, jot one idea down, and then during the presentation that you can use for your own self in the weeks to come. All right. So agenda, we will start out with an issue many students face, then the whole approach, and 3 activity examples: oil spill ecology, tower building, and brain and concussion activity. And I will share outcomes from short assessments and surveys that I conducted, and practical tips for replication of these activities. We will end with a brief interactive moment so you leave with one concrete next step. Let us begin with the why of this talk. Many youth avoid STEM activities because it is too hard or they think it's not for them. Traditional memorization can also stifle curiosity. And when students handle materials, make predictions, and compare results to evidence, they see science as a real thing that can solve real problems. The earlier they get that experience, the more likely they are to continue. Near-peer mentoring also lowers barriers. Students end up asking more questions and take smart risks with someone only a little older than them in the room. Think of one learner yourself who could benefit from a win in science this month with HOLES activities. So what are HOLES? Well, HOLES stands for hands-on learning experiences. We use everyday materials, pose a real question, and let students test, design, and explain. The facilitator or the person leading the session will coach with prompts like, what do you expect? How do you measure? Active inquiry-driven problem solving, as I said here. What counts as fair evidence, for example? So, and the structure for this is portable for any type of setting, classrooms, clubs, and any type of community. So hands-on learning experiences empower students to become active investigators. And instead of memorizing facts, they explore open-ended questions, take risks, and collaborate with near-peer mentors. So one of the four pillars that we have are inquiry and curiosity, a supportive environment, peer collaboration, and making sure that any whole activity we do is low cost and accessible to anybody who tries to replicate it. I started whole clubs as a student volunteer under teacher guidance. We worked with elementary and middle school learners, including Title I partner schools in Baltimore. Each lesson includes goals, steps, safety notes, and quick assessments so that anybody can pick it up and run with it. So here's a picture of me doing an example, a whole lesson for Title I school in Baltimore City. This was specifically focused on the sense of taste and smell and how we can connect, how those two are connected. And so we ran a fun experiment where kids got to plug their nose and see if the thing they drank what tasted the same before and after their sense of smell was blocked off. So moving into the first activity, this is our oil spill activity. So, for example, the first thing we would do was introduce concept of why oil spills occur, and for example, something like a tanker spill in oceans, and we would use real world examples of this, such as the oil spill from the BP oil company, and we would make sure that the kids can relate to these. Sorry, let me go back here. We'd make sure that the kids can relate to these issues, and so that these issues don't seem foreign to them, but actually seem concrete and real, and they can actually understand why these things are problems. So we, after discussing examples of recent oil spills, we introduced concepts of why oil and water do not mix and why that is such a problem. Because with oil and water not mixing, it's a real issue for why, like you see in the pictures I show here, wildlife, and just how much of a problem that can cause for our for the marines, ocean biology and things like that. Then we would introduce why oil spills are poisonous directly to humans, wildlife, fish, and etc., like I said, and indirectly to things like the economy and policy impacts, while still keeping everything in a clear and digestible format for young learners. Then we would simulate the oil spill with water and oil. As you can see in these pictures here, we would put the oil in this tinfoil container, and we would simulate a shore that has rocks closer to the shore and different objects. So we would try removing this oil spill with using objects like spoons, cotton balls, and pantyhose, and different ways of absorbing oil to see how difficult it actually is to kind of get rid of that oil. Then we would introduce the concept of dish detergents. So, and as you can see in the bottom picture, you can see that blue tint of the pan, and that's the dish detergent at work. So we would talk about what technique works best, whether it be skimming or absorbing the oil, and we would connect it to sustainability. So evaluate trade-offs of cleanup strategies. Why is what strategy is most effective, and what are some of the benefits of going with one over the other. And then we would encourage discussion. After that, we would have the kids do their own experiments and observe this for themselves, and we would encourage them to talk about it and with their peers and have good discussion with their peers so they can reinforce these concepts and make sense of it at a relatively basic level. The second activity is designing towers. So first, we would ask students to name famous towers. So some of the famous towers I've shown are things like the Eiffel Tower, which is particularly important, and I'll get to that later. Other towers we would show are the Empire State Building, and we would compare design of the various towers. For example, why are some more effective, or why we would start off with actually talking about the shape of them. So what is the shape of them, and then we would focus on things like how the Eiffel Tower, using real examples, are built in the shape of a triangle, and then we would talk about why that is more effective. So we would talk about why certain designs that start with a big base in the bottom and get smaller to the top are more effective than those buildings that are maybe going straight up and have no alteration in the width of the building as it gets taller, and we would discuss why that's a problem and use real world examples. For example, 432 Park Avenue in New York City is experiencing real issues because of how not only how tall the building is, but because the width of the building stays the same, and it's one of the tallest buildings in New York City. So it's having real issues with winds and other problems. So we would use a physical example of this and prove our point using a hands-on demo, which is very key, integral pillar to the whole learning concept. Um, we would have them instruct them to stand with their legs together versus apart, and then we would gently have their classmates tap on their shoulder to determine stability. And we would determine what whether it is better to stand with your legs closed or your legs further apart and why. So we would use an everyday example, like whether during strong winds is it better to stand with your legs apart or together, and we would simulate that winds with that force or that gentle tap from their classmates. Our next activity is this spaghetti, or sorry, this is the activity portion of this lesson. We would challenge these students to be engineers and to build the tallest tower with limited materials. So I'm sure you guys have all seen this spaghetti tower thing before, but we make it in a fun and digestible format and use real world examples beforehand, so it actually makes sense why we're doing this spaghetti tower exercise, not just having your science teacher say, oh, let's do a spaghetti exercise today, and not having any reasoning behind that. So we would teach students how to design. So consider factors like stability, weight distribution, and iteration. And we would explain those in simple terms. And then after that, we would be promoting teamwork by having them pair in groups and collaborate and celebrate creative solutions, and have it make it a little bit of a contest, so it makes it seem more fun and have them more celebratory and make it seem more enthusiastic. Our last activity, as an example, is brain and concussions. So first, we would teach students about neuroscience concepts. For example, neurons, connections, and synapses using the neuron model. And we would explain this in very easy to understand format. We would ask questions like, what happens when you hurt your arm or knee? Do you get swelling? And what is a brain injury? And one of the best examples I like to think of is when talking about neurons and connections and synapses is what happens when you touch a hot stove. Well, your hand pulls away. And so that we are just explaining these concepts in really easy formats so that these students at a very young age can get involved in STEM and have a passion in STEM and want to further their career in that subject. Then we go over things like, why is the brain important? Well, it helps us to breathe, it helps us to walk, it helps us to do many things that many young STEM scientists don't even know about yet. And then we talk about what protects our brain naturally and what happens during a brain injury. So we talk about things like the skull and how during a brain injury, the brain has, when it swells, because just like any other part of your body, when you hurt something, it swells, and the brain does the same thing. The brain swells and it has nowhere to go because it's trapped in the skull. And so that's very important. We emphasize that a lot. We get students buy-in for importance of sports like football or rugby. We encourage them to, or biking even, we encourage them to and wear helmets and discuss why it is so important, because many people, well, oh yeah, just wear a helmet, but they don't actually know why. And so we explain why, and we do it in a very easy way. So we ask students if they wear helmets or if they should wear helmets when they ride a bike. And we discuss why it's important to have protective gear and make our brains safe and keep our brains safe from injuries. And then we get buy-in by doing, we get our overall we get buy-in for STEM and this topic by doing a holes experiments for this topic. So we use raw eggs and divide students in teams and just have them design protective gear. So Team one, for example, would use an egg to simulate the brain and tape and use an egg carton to minimize the impact, as you can see in that picture. And team two perhaps would use the same thing except use paper towels, and team three styrofoams, and team four cotton balls. And students will drop eggs from a predetermined height at around 4 feet or so, and see, and or they'll actually before they see, they'll predict the outcome. Then once they predict the outcome, then they actually get to test it, and so they get to see certain that the results of their work. And so this provides buy-in for them actually doing a hands-on experiment rather than just learning about all this in a class, because you can learn about all these things in a class, like, oh well, what happens when you hurt your arm or knee, the issues when your brain swells, and when you have a traumatic brain injury, or when you have some sort of brain swelling. But the way you actually have them engage in the subject is really by doing this hands-on learning experiment. And that's why in EinSTEAM we really, that's one of our really critical founding pillars, that you make sure that these kids never just learn something from a presentation or learn something from a lecture, but rather learn something via physical contact, so an experiential learning. So moving on to our results and impacts, we've seen higher engagements in STEM. So participation doubled in our after school sessions, and these were after doing pre and post surveys and observations, of course. We saw improved learning. The reported knowledge scores increased by more than 50%. And in terms of confidence, students felt empowered to pursue STEM, and not only pursue STEM, but felt confident with the material at hand. So this is really, really critical for inspiring the next generation of STEM scientists and learners to pursue STEM and want to have a passion in science, and actually find it enjoyable and likable rather than just some hard to do type of thing. All right. So now I'll switch sort of to the scaling and recommendations, kind of analyzing all of this and how you guys can all implement these strategies. So first of all, we partner with local schools and community centers. So we specifically focus on schools that don't otherwise have access to these types of education. Specifically in my work, focusing on schools in the Baltimore City area, which is where I'm originally from. And these are Title I schools in the city, and that don't necessarily have access to this hands-on type of learning. And I've witnessed this through touring the schools and sitting in on these science lessons. As a musician, sometimes we go to schools to sing, and with my choir, we go to these schools to sing. And when we get a little tour of the school beforehand, and I witness kind of the lack of hands-on learning. And that's what founded me to start EinSTEAM, the 501c3 nonprofit, was because I wanted to solve this really prevalent issue. Because I was passionate in STEM from a young age, but I know many people, it's really hard to get passionate about STEM if they don't experience these holes or hands-on learning, experiential learning, when they're young. And so that's what we really try to emphasize. So we select accessible materials and topics relevant to students, and empower near peer mentors. So we like to think students teaching students. So I'm a student, a high school student, high school senior, and I'm a student teaching fellow students, fellow middle and elementary school students. And so we train high school or undergraduate volunteers in our organization, and we measure impact using surveys, observations, testimonies, and reflections. And we iterate, and if we see something is successful and we see something works, we're going to do it again. And we always make sure to share the resources with these students and make sure that these experiments can easily be replicated at home for future use. And by doing this, we build a sustainable outreach network where students are able to continue and further this work and share with their peers all across the world. And so I'm proud to say that we actually have done work with underserved countries like some countries in Africa and India. We've done work with schools there, and we make sure to share that, make sure these resources and these experiments are very accessible to them, and that they can easily do this online or do this at home. And it's become really easy with that. When we started to focus specifically, we actually have started focusing on coding lessons and things like that. And so teaching coding is obviously very easy to teach online. So that's how we outreach to a lot of those students via online classrooms like Zoom, like we're using right now. And it's really effective to have students sit in a classroom with their teacher, so on a Zoom call with us, the EinSTEAM helpers and students, and we sit on a Zoom call and teach these kids across the world. So finally, conclusion and call to action. As you all know, I think you all know that early hands-on experiences ignite curiosity and confidence, and near-peer mentoring builds relatable role models and sustainable pipelines for future STEM scientists. Holds are low-cost, replicable, and adaptable to any community. So as I quoted here, let's nurture the next generation of researchers. So join the movements. I have my email here at the bottom if you would like to connect with me. I can go to that, but first I would like to hear from you guys. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them in the chat with of any of these activities specifically or just in general. But thank you guys for listening. Appreciate it.
Great job, Torben. Thank you. And thanks to all four of our speakers in this block. It was really, really interesting. You can message any of the speakers or anybody here in the Whova app throughout the rest of the conference today and tomorrow. So there's one more breakout block left. There's some really good sessions in this next block on AI and a workshop and a great panel on nutrition science. So that's a wrap here. Happy Halloween to everybody.